Welcome to this webinar. I'm really delighted to have Mike Hannan back again. For those of you who've watched several of our webinars, you'll know Mike's a regular attendant and presenter. He's one of those guys who not only has just incredible depths of knowledge and wisdom, but is also very happy to share that knowledge and wisdom. And this time, we're going to do something a little bit different, right, Mike? We're going to have a bit of a Christmas theme going on, a bit of a Dickensian Victorian theme, I think, to this presentation. I hope that doesn't augur too badly for the environment that most PMOs work in. But today we're going to really look at some of the wisdom that Mike's distilled over the years, but do it with a little bit of fun and a bit of humor. So, Mike, over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, so in the true holiday spirit, I thought we would title this 3 Ways Your PMO Can Give the Gift of Unlimited Upside. I find too often in the PMO space, we PMO leaders find ourselves so squeezed between the demands of those above us and our peers and our teams below trying to execute dutifully. And it often feels like this notion of unlimited upside, it's like, well, just get me through the day and I'll be satisfied with that. Don't talk about unlimited upside. But because it's the holiday season, why not give some gifts? Why not imagine a world that could be with the same wonder as a child on Christmas morning? So with that, let me start with some perspectives. So this will probably, I imagine, be familiar to many PMO leaders out there. Again, we thought if you've ever read Dickens' A Christmas Carol, or seen the various Scrooge movies and things over the years, you'll know this character, Mr. Scrooge, who's this very, not very generous, very miserly, selfish person. But my point is he has a perspective. And while we may chuckle at this perspective of there is no such thing as rich enough, only poor enough, I'll tie it back to the gifts that PMO leaders deserve this holiday season. Okay, so that's certainly one perspective I'm sure many of us are familiar with. Let's take another one. Bob Cratchit, also from the same Dickensian tradition. He was the overworked and underpaid manager who was unfortunately Mr. Scrooge's personal assistant, and he would beg and plead for any time off, and even Christmas he would ask for just a half day off. In some of the versions. I'm sure many of us are familiar with that perspective. And then I'm sure, as PMO leaders, you might have some influence in your organizations, but certainly you have a number of stakeholders who I would consider, the tiny Tim or the uninfluential stakeholder perspective, perhaps some long-forgotten user of an IT system, or somebody who's affected by the decisions that get made but can't really influence much. And so the scene from one of the variations of A Christmas Carol had Bob Cratchit, who's Tiny Tim's dad, walking his children by the window of a toy store, and the children were looking in awe of these wonderful toys assembled, wishing they could have at least one of them, but knowing that they probably wouldn't even get any. And the dad said, well, which one would you like if you could get one? And Tiny Tim's sister said, oh, I'll take the dolly. And he said, well, how about you, Tiny Tim? And he said, well, I'd like all of them. Everyone was quite surprised that he would be so greedy to say he'd like all of them. His dad said, well, why do you say that, Tim? And he said, well, you said I can't have none of them, so I might as well like them all. How'd you like that accent, Stuart?
That's pretty good. I'm impressed you went for that one. I thought Dick Van Dyke had joined us for a second there.
Okay, so to turn this just slightly more serious, there's a character in the book, and the movies have been made on it, that is this ghost of Jacob Marley. He's the first ghost to appear, if you've ever seen movies or read the book. And this Mr. Marley had been a partner of Scrooge's before he'd passed away. And so there were two legendary misers very selfish, who had gotten along just fine because of all that. But this ghost had come back to basically wisen up Mr. Scrooge and say, you might want to choose a different path. And Scrooge is saying, well, how could you say I need a different path? You were a legend of business. You were an amazing man, and I've looked up to you. You're brilliant. And how could anyone who's so successful in business tell me that he has regrets and that I may too? And so what the ghost of Jacob Marley says is, mankind was my business. I'll let you read the rest there. He said, there's a comprehensive ocean of my business, and making money was only a piece of that. And so that obviously is a turning point for Mr. Scrooge to begin thinking on how he might redefine success. And in my mind, take that same perspective of there is no such thing as rich enough, only poor enough, but apply that to mankind at large, not just himself.
Yeah, and this is one of specifics. And this is one of the reasons I love working with you, Mike, because you bring this sort of really rounded view to what delivering projects is all about. The portfolio exists to make things better, right? It's not there just to keep people busy. The portfolio is there to enact change, and that change should be making things better. And that can be on a big scale, at the scale of humanity, or it can be on a small scale, just making something more efficient or making somebody's life easier or whatever it may be. And to me, this is really at the heart of what and it's why I'm kind of so passionate about this stuff, is that this is at the heart of what makes projects worth doing. It's about what is the benefit, what's the advantage to mankind, what is the upside, to use your term, from doing the things that we do.
So let's take perfect sort of segue to my next series of comments. Let's take this away from the fun of this story and take it to some things that might actually be a lot more concrete and tangible from a day-to-day point of view. So if we take, here we go, some additional perspectives that would be much more commonplace on a day-to-day basis. We do have people who pay for our projects, and while most people call them stakeholders or something like that, let's just call them investors. Because after all, that's what they are. And if we start thinking of them as investors, we start thinking of people like Mr. Scrooge saying there's no such thing as rich enough, only poor enough. And let's imagine some reasonable things that these investors might say, right? And so, again, this could be project space, but think of it in broader investor terms. An investor might say, I'm hoping for solid returns sometime soon, but earlier is better, right? So that's a variation on there's no such thing as rich enough, only poor enough, but obviously not as miserly sounding, much more reasonable sounding for a rational investor. And if you compare that to what a PM might say, the PM might say, I love the feeling of completing projects really fast. And boy, what great impact I can see when that happens, right? So the two of them actually are saying essentially the same thing on speed. Oftentimes PMs and their teams feel the pressure of, not early enough, go faster, like a miserly Scrooge cracking a whip on them or something. But the reality is they like going fast. They like being part of a system that knows how to move fast. And they like feeling like they can satisfy investors' desire for unlimited upside. So let's take another investor perspective. This would be obviously less to do with projects, maybe more familiar to those of us who invest for our own retirements. I'm retiring in 10 years, let's say, and I'm not even hoping for giant returns. But boy, the day I retire, that money better be there. And so what a PM might say is sort of similar to this is I love the feeling of delivering on all of my commitments. But when everyone's really relying on me to come in within plan, boy, that feels great when I can do it. So there's, again, this common notion of reliability that connects these two perspectives quite directly and quite in a quite synchronized fashion. So a big one that will definitely be familiar to the PM world investors that say, I'd rather not invest in things that have wildly uncertain time frames and which may require me to throw good money after bad. Boy, we hear that all the time in project space. And of course, this is where the two perspectives between investors and PMs often fail to align. Instead, you have PMs saying, boy, why does it seem so hard to get projects funded around here? And of course, there is this issue, because the investors aren't confident, right? So there is this notion of we have to bridge these two perspectives in an effective project selection approach. And that'll be the third of three gifts I'll get to in just a few minutes. Okay. So what can PMO leaders actually do on speed, reliability, and selection? So one, to improve speed, again, there's all sorts of things that you can do, but I would say the very biggest one that's been shown study after study of hundreds of organizations is one not super familiar to the traditional PM community, this notion of staggering. And not just saying, well, we don't really have all the resources to kick off all my projects tomorrow, so let's just defer a few months. That's a start, right? That's consistent with the notion of staggering here for sure. But what most people do is they try to do it according to overall capacity. They look across their resource pools and say, well, I might have a few guys coming free in a month, so that surely means I have the capacity to kick off a project in about a month. And I say, well, you might not. If you focus instead on your most constrained resource type, and almost everyone intuitively knows pretty well what that type is in their own organizations, and say, let's just set a drumbeat of reliable execution, fast and reliable execution according to my most constrained resource type. Sometimes you can do that quite effectively with no tools at all. Well, I'm a big believer in good project management tools and using tool sets well. In this case, some people do it just rule of thumb and guess their way through it and achieve a doubling or tripling in the throughput of completed projects. Pretty great.
Yeah, I mean that's
my one.
So that's a huge point. I mean, it sounds like a bit of a throwaway where Mike says doubling or tripling in throughput. But it's not just kind of something that he's made up on the spur of the moment. These are actual numbers. So this first gift is a real winner. And Mike is a great resource, as I said at the beginning. He's very generous with his time. If you want to know how to get some of that, I would drop Mike an email or visit his website, and you'll get some insight into how to deliver that gift. It's a real one. It's huge. Go help yourself.
Oh, thanks, Stuart. And to that end, I do have a client who recently achieved a tripling in throughput, just doing this and one other technique. And I'd be happy to introduce anyone who reaches out to me to this individual. He'd be more than happy to speak with anyone that has questions about this. Okay, so that's gift number one. Gift number two on reliability. Again, all sorts of things you can do to improve reliability, but if I were to give you just one gift, I would say this somewhat counterintuitive notion of eliminating certain commitments. So the notion here is any commitment that's lower level than what the customer really cares about is not worth setting commitments on. So if you say, well, I really, really need this this bridge built by a certain date, maybe because we expect all sorts of holiday traffic to go over it, and it would be enormously valuable to be delivered earlier versus later. So please, let's go do it. That's an important commitment, and one that obviously we'd like to keep. Pretty critical to reliability. But if I say, well, we're not sure exactly when the concrete will be delivered, but we want to hold some contractor to deliver it by a certain date, then that's where we get into some of the negative effects. So maybe a more simple example than the concrete. Stuart, if you just asked me when I could deliver some task by, and I know I can do it in, say, 5 days on average, but I'm thinking if my reputation's on the line, I'm not going to promise you 5 days because I know there's a chance, there's various unknowns that could hit out of my control, and it might take me 10 days. If I care about my commitments, I'm going to promise 10 days. And so will every single other person in the entire project. And so we will effectively double the length of our project, and still some of those longer commitments may not make it, which could delay things further. And so the notion is, if we know that there's all this variability at the lower level, let's manage it the way a good insurance company would and aggregate the risk and get aggressive with our timeframes, which of course we all want, and then protect the project from all that variability by having a single project level cushion or buffer. It could be a schedule buffer or some extra management reserve dollars, but usually much greater quantities than traditional practice calls for. And the key, again, is eliminating any of that lower level stuff so that if I can knock my 5-day task out in, say, 2 days, I just have a great run of it, and Murphy's Law stays at bay, then I can just deliver. And any estimate anyone gives me of, say, 5 days, I don't pace myself to the 5 days, and I don't get mad if I can't quite make the 5 days, because I'm hustling. Everyone knows I'm hurrying. We all share the same sense of urgency, and it aligns all of our interests and puts us all in the same boat.
And this, again, keeping the theme of having a very sort of human discussion here, if you think about how we all behave, or at least how I behave, maybe I'm different to everybody else, but if I give myself 3 days to do a task, that task is going to take 3 days, whether I could have done it in a day and a half or not, because I've given myself 3 days. And I think there's something very normal, very human in that process. And so by eliminating those sort of task level goals, you're taking away those sort of artificial permissions, if you like, to procrastinate or to put off getting started, or to gold plate your deliverable, or whatever it is that's slowing you down. You're eliminating that temptation. And so this is, again, about empowering people to deliver quickly and trusting them, as it says there. And it's also about taking away the kind of the human, the psychological temptations to do things the wrong way, or to take longer than they need to deliver tasks. And again, as someone who manages teams and who also contributes to teams, just giving the freedom to crank through something quickly, to focus on it in an uninterrupted fashion, and to crank through it, in and of itself is a huge gift that I enjoy and I value when I'm delivering stuff. So again, this is great. It's very human, but it also has a very sort of business valuable result at the same time as having a human valuable result.
And that last notion of trust, it does sound sort of fuzzy, perhaps. How can we bank a hard PM technique on something as fuzzy as trust? But boy, when you trust the people who report under you to just execute well, and they see that trust is there, and they know that they could be slacking off and harming things, and that's a risk you've taken by trusting them. Boy, the slackers become very few and far between. This notion of people saying, wow, I negotiated for 5 days on that task when I could knock it out by lunchtime. Boy, the boss is stupid. I sure pulled one over on him. All of that stuff just goes away, right? This sort of unified team behavior of, this is not a game of you versus me. This is a game of us all rowing in the same direction as fast as we can. Okay, great. So gift number 3 on selection. Those of you who are familiar with transparent choice and what they provide the marketplace these days, you know where I'm going here. But certainly using consistent logic, having analytically sound criteria weightings, and making sure investment candidates stack up in a measurable way against each other, using all available subjective inputs from the powers that be. So we're not saying we want a machine to make our decisions for us, but we are saying when we have human beings in the room whose job it is to make sound decisions, that it not all just be focused on cutting, political deals, focusing on the wheeling and dealing aspect of selection so that everyone feels like they got a piece, but instead focusing on things that actually drive value in the organization and change the conversation from how can I scratch your back so that you might scratch mine to how might we improve this organization around here? Or how might we improve the value we deliver to our customers? So certainly Transparent Choice offers a great solution for that. By the way, this note here, if you remember the investor comment from our previous slide, I really don't want to invest in things that have wildly uncertain timeframes or that may require me to invest more money than originally planned. Once you improve speed and reliability, the data that feeds the project selection process actually becomes more trustable, more bankable. Right? So if I'm an investor and I see my investments showing returns earlier and hitting their due dates when those due dates matter, I'm not only excited because my returns are getting higher, but my future decisions on what projects to select, I start to trust them a lot more. The estimates you give me on when this thing will be completed and how much it'll cost and what the ROI will be, we all kind of snicker and laugh and joke today because we know they're just wild guesses. Right? We know deep down, even if the human being making them is a trusted individual, anyone that digs deep behind it, they kind of have to admit, like, well, if we're not really executing fast and reliably, it's really hard to say. So these three things tend to create this virtuous cycle, right? So estimates get more bankable, get a higher volume of these things. Each one of them is higher value. So you get these ever higher ROIs. Then all of a sudden, that notion of Mr. Scrooge saying, no such thing as rich enough, only poor enough, applies to all of mankind. This starts sounding like a pretty good thing to be a part of. So in the gift of giving a little extra on the holidays, I've actually thrown in a fourth thing that you can do as a bonus. And that simply is to inspire others by making humankind your business. And again, as fuzzy as that might sound, or lofty, or unbusinesslike, I contend that every project portfolio I've ever seen is advancing humankind in some way. The key is helping people see it. So if it's not clear even to you, keep clarifying it in your own head, keep asking the right questions, check in with your folks, and if it's not clear to them, keep clarifying it. I think you'll stimulate quite a bit of inspiration, even if your project portfolio deals with things that you might consider quite mundane and not all that inspirational. People want to be part of something more than just getting a paycheck. Right? They want to feel like they're making an impact. Help them make that connection.
And it's interesting on that point, Mike, is you talked about that prioritization process earlier, and that's one of the ways in which you can make those connections, right? By having a good process for defining, where are we going as an organization? What are we trying to achieve? How is it that we're going to have an impact on society as a business? And then linking the projects that you're doing to those goals means that the project implementation teams actually understand overall in the aggregate what is it that what's the mountain that we're going to move, what's the difference we're going to make to people's lives. And if you don't go through those, if you don't have the vision, you haven't picked the projects that support the vision, and if you can't reliably and scalably deliver on the vision, then you're not going to have the impact. So connect the prioritization process, connects the vision to the portfolio, and then executing the portfolio is what makes it all real. I like this way about thinking of a portfolio. It's all about value, and it's about wanting to deliver the most that you possibly can. And I think most people are just wired that way. That's how we are. So it's great. This resonates really well.
Couldn't have said it better. So then this next point here, PMs. We spend so much time asking our PMs to report on status of schedule compliance and budget compliance and scope compliance that it's easy to stay inside that triple constraint and just be focused on executing according to the box you feel you're put in as a PM. But help your PM see the connection between the actual investment side of this. Right? Again, some investors just wanting unlimited upside, like Mr. Scrooge. Others saying, look, it might be as simple as I just want this thing to come in on time, and it's important to me and the value I'm trying to achieve to get this thing in on time. And here's why. So rather than just say, meet your schedule, meet your budget, meet your scope, have some conversations with your PMs about why this particular project is particularly schedule sensitive, why its value proposition and ROI are particularly scope sensitive, perhaps. I help them really see that they are the engine of achieving the ROI. They're not just living inside this triple constraint with everyone kind of climbing on top of them, demanding more and more. And then why stop there? Let's take it even one better. Why not have PMs start leading those conversations, right? How can they get better and better at getting investors what they need if they don't even understand the investor perspective, where they see investors all as just miserly Mr. Scrooges making unfair demands to work on Christmas and things like that. I've never seen a PM in a status meeting be asked, what more could you do with your team to deliver more of what the investor community needs here? Right? Sometimes the answer could be, you know what? Going over budget by a little bit, could double the ROI. Oh my God, you're recommending going over budget? That's heresy in PM circles. But perhaps not if we're actually asking the right value-oriented questions and connecting with what investors actually need. So in the end, rather than have the PMO be this sort of burdensome layer of overhead that everyone groans when the PMO leader walks by because there's some checklist they didn't comply with or some standard that they may have violated and they're afraid of getting caught. Rather than be that kind of PMO, make sure you work yourself with your identity as, hey, we are the stewards of the system that drives speed and reliability and sound investment decisions. You couldn't achieve any of this without us. That's why we're here. With that, I will leave you a few places you can go learn more. Most of these are free. Let you see them here briefly. I do offer this half-a-day planning workshop to kind of help certain project teams or PMOs apply some of these concepts in practice. And then, of course, I can't give this one away, but I've kept it as low cost as I can for targeted CEOs in the IT community, but all of my non-IT customers tell me they get a lot out of it as well. And with that, I'll just leave you my contact info and hand it back to you, Stuart.
Mike, thank you for that. As usual, fun, interesting, energetic, thought-provoking, and just what we all need to help those mince pies go down. So really appreciate it. Absolutely loved the bit of Dick Van Dyke in the middle there. That made me smile. And so the next webinar from Mike will be Mary Poppins and how to make the PMO really fly. So on that note, thank you all for joining us, and do come back, check out our other webinars. There's lots more content out there to help you make your PMO great.
Happy holidays.